Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, and our dear friend, Professor Marandi, is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Hi, Nima. Thank you for inviting me.
Let me start, Professor Marandi, with the peace plan, the so called peace plan. And we know that Iran has decided not to participate in what has happened in Egypt. What were the main points of Iran in not participating in the summit?
I think it's clear. The Iranians felt that they should not be at all a part of this because this, as you were implying, this is not really a peace plan. It is a plan for trying to force the Palestinians to capitulate and to surrender. The resistance, of course, they made the right move. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the other groups, they sat together and wrote a very well constructed response so as to prevent uh, Trump from having any excuse to escalate. And I think the first stage of the plan will probably be implemented. We already have seen that the Israelis have murdered 5 more Palestinians a couple of hours ago. But we've seen a prisoner exchange and a partial withdrawal of the Israeli regime. But I do not foresee this plan at all being implemented in this, in the subsequent stages. It's just not doable. The resistance is not going to give up its weapons because they know that the Israelis will massacre them, and that none of these countries that participated in this comedy program yesterday, uh, none of them are going to stop the regime. Um, all of these regional actors like Erdogan and the Qatari regime and Egypt and Jordan and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, none of them are going to uh, break off ties, whatever ties they currently have. They're not going to stop business, whatever businesses they have. They're going to carry out business as usual. They've been doing it for the last few years. So Hamas recognizes that it needs its arms. And Iran, in order to prevent this from uh, legitimizing the occupation, legitimizing the apartheid regime, it refused to attend. And of course, it made a very smart move. We saw how Trump basically humiliated leader after leader. It was an embarrassment to watch. I think he embarrassed the American people in Palestine when he was in speaking in front of the Knesset. He humiliated the United States and basically showed that Adelson, a Zionist in the United States, a Zionist multi-billionaire, that person calls the shots, and that person that he and his wife, they basically were the reason why uh, the Golan Heights was the Americans accepted it as a part of the Syrian Golan Heights. The Americans accepted it as a part of the Israeli regime, and why Jerusalem or Al Quds became the capital of Israel, according to the United States, and so on. So that was while that was a humiliation for the United States, uh, Cairo was a humiliation for all those heads of state and senior officials who participated. And I think Iran made a very smart move not to participate for all of these reasons. One was because it was a comedy show. Two, because Trump he's carried out genocide. Uh, he's the genocidal partner of Netanyahu, and of course he carried out airstrikes on Iran in support of Netanyahu, and it's not a peace plan. It's not a peace plan. This is an attempt to subjugate the Palestinian people. So I think these are more reasons. Each one of these reasons on its own, I think, would have been enough for Iran not to participate. And I think now, I mean, I've been speaking to numerous people today. Lots of people have watched different clips from yesterday, and it's universal that everyone that I've spoken to says said it's a good thing that the president or the foreign minister didn't go. And some people who were insisting over the last few days that the president should go, and they wrote articles in newspapers or on websites, they've been deeply embarrassed.
When it comes to the performance of Donald Trump yesterday in Israel, I have Paul Carrick Roberts on this podcast, and we've heard from Tucker Carlson as well that Netanyahu is running the show in Washington when it comes to the Middle East. But it was unbelievable looking at Donald Trump and trying everything from his daughter talking about, she you cannot believe how can this guy make these things. And he was humiliating the position of the United States. And I don't know what was the benefit for Donald Trump to go in that direction, because it shows, just proves that everybody who was talking about Netanyahu running the show in Washington was right.
Yes, exactly. He basically proved what Tucker Carlson had said, and that Netanyahu. Well, Tucker Carlson said Netanyahu has been saying that he calls the shots, and he is proving that Netanyahu was right, and that he is indeed calling the shots. And I think one of the humiliating moments was when he said that his daughter forsake Christianity and Christ for the sake of Israel, for the sake of the Israeli regime, for the sake of this genocidal, monstrous regime. It wasn't because she thought that he didn't say because she believed that Judaism was superior to Christianity. He said because she loved, because of her love for Israel. And so this genocidal apartheid regime, this ethno supremacist monstrous regime that has been subjugating the Palestinian people for decades. This regime is the reason why she gave up Christianity for Zionism, and then he goes and literally brags about it in front of the Knesset. I found that disgraceful. I mean, I found that to be beyond disgraceful.
Let me say something, because the head of Knesset said something, that Donald Trump is the Cyrus the Great of our time. What, the fellows, Iranian, I'm talking about Cyrus the Great. His fellow Iranians are under attack, under sanctions. They were threatened by the Trump administration. They were attacked by Israelis. And how can they talk about these two? What Cyrus the Great has anything to do with Donald Trump? I don't see that.
Trump is ignorant. He doesn't know much about anything. And that is why they play on his ignorance. They're just trying to make him happy and to feel more indebted to them so that he will do as they say. So, it's all about his ego. They know what they're supposed to do. And of course, they control him anyhow. We saw in his speech in the Knesset that, that Netanyahu and the Zionists are in charge. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he even said that, um, you know, Adelson would call him and say, want to see him and say, look, I'm the president. This is not how it works, but he'd come. So it just shows that he is not the boss. He's admitting this. He's admitting that these people call the shots. And so, alongside that, they feed his ego, make him feel great. He's obsessed with himself, and all they have to do is try to make him feel that that he's seen as some great historical figure, and that's enough. I mean, his obsession for the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, is an embarrassment. I think by now, anyone who has said, if he had said 1/100th of what he said about the Nobel Peace Prize, it would have been an embarrassment. Everyone knows it, but they keep telling him that you deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. Why? Because they know that's how they can uh, they can make him happy with them and uh, listen to them and do what they want. Some people in Iran, naive people who some of them academics, but very naive people. They think that if Iran did the same, it would change the UN Iran the U.S. Iranian relationship. But of course, that's nonsense. Trump, they feed his ego, but they have to be in the Zionist camp. They have to be on the side of on you know on the side of the Israeli regime. It doesn't work any other way.
Yeah, he asked the president of Israel to pardon Netanyahu. And many people, I talk with people who
Well,
somehow,
he's basically declaring that, look, I'm a part of this genocide. He was saying all what sort of weapons we gave, weapons that I didn't even know existed. He's basically, screaming, yelling, saying, "Look, please count me as a partner in this Holocaust. I was a part of this Holocaust." So he's claiming it for himself, which is extraordinary because this is going to go in the history books. We've been discussing this for a long time, but what has happened in Gaza and what will quite probably continue to happen in future, we'll see, is going to go into the history books as a genocide, as a Holocaust. The Israeli regime will never be able to escape this. This will be remembered for decades to come. They'll never again be able to hide behind the so-called, this so-called anti-Semitism anymore. No one is going to believe it. No one. They cannot use that as. They can no longer speak about the Holocaust and use that as an excuse for their behavior. It doesn't work. They've destroyed their image and credibility, and people have learned a lot about the Palestine issue over the last 2 years. Many young people, they've been reading and watching documentaries and books or articles about who the Semites are. People now know that the Israelis are from Europe. The Ashkenazi Jews, Netanyahu is Polish. The former defense minister, I think he too is Polish. The president, all of them are from Europe. The head of the opposition from Europe. They're all European. The non-Ashkenazi Jews are mostly from across West Asia, North Africa. They're not the Semites. It's the Palestinians who are the Semites. People now know that. Or on the other hand, people now know, they're not going to accept a crime committed by the Nazis in the mid 20th century for the Holocaust in Gaza as an excuse for the Holocaust in Gaza, which is in many ways far worse because it was carried out in front of the eyes of the world, shamelessly. We saw images of soldiers proudly speaking about how genocidal they were, about their leaders talking about how they're going to wipe these Amalek out. This is all documented. It was all carried out in front of the eyes of the world day and night. So the Israeli regime no longer has the opportunity, the ability to use that. And when Trump goes and tries to claim a role, of course, he's deeply involved. He was deeply involved. When he goes out and says, "Look, I was a part of this Holocaust," it destroys him, and it also puts to shame all those people who went to Egypt. They should, everyone who was there, everyone, they helped this monster whitewash his crimes. They all helped him whitewash his crimes. It's more than an embarrassment. Every single leader there, they had no right to be there.
including Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is the PLO, the head of PLO, and he's based in the West Bank. But what does he have to do with the Gaza, and what did he do for Gaza and the Gazan people so far, and what was the necessity of him being there? There is no, looking at the 21 points in the peace plan, that so-called peace plan, there is no sign of the United States or any of these parties participating in the summit accepting the right of Palestinian people. to decide about their future. How can you call that a peace plan, or somehow initiating, a process to initiate a peace plan?
Mahmoud Abbas is a jailer for the Israeli regime. He does their dirty work for them. He's been bought off a long time ago, and so to the people around him. During this genocide, he was insulting the resistance, and meanwhile, the Israelis have been taking huge swathes of territory in the West Bank, and he did nothing about it. His his people in the West Bank have been undermined by the Israeli regime increasingly over the past few months, and he's toothless. He has no ability to do anything about it. So his presence there doesn't bother me because he's a nobody. He's nothing. Everyone knows who he is. He's just like those people who collaborated with the apartheid regime in South Africa or Southern Africa, but far worse than them. But what bothers me is that these heads of state of countries across the region and beyond went to Egypt to celebrate Trump, to celebrate this monster who's helped slaughter hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, through starvation. We will gradually know the true numbers, but I think that the deaths are in the hundreds of thousands because many are under the rubble, but more than but the real number is those who died of illness, those who had cancer, for example, or other severe illnesses and no longer had medicine. They all died. Uh, some who may have had injuries, yet later on they became infectious, and then there was no medicine, so they died. I mean, the people who died, or the people who died during the past 2 years, the numbers will show based on what happens in normal societies, how many people have died. But I imagine that the number is uh, far, far more than 60, 70,000. So these people who went there basically were giving him a pass, giving Trump a pass after what he'd done. And we still know that it's not over. As I said earlier, just today, before the show, I read that 5 more Palestinians were murdered. Is anyone going to do anything about it? Or any of these leaders who had that uh, comedy show with Trump yesterday, are they going to do anything about it? Of course not.
Actually, Yemenis, Houthis said that they reject optimism about the peace plan, and they're boosting their military to get, they want to be prepared to, if something happens in Gaza. Do you believe that they're gonna, if they take the hostage, the prisoners, are they gonna get back and again and attacking civilians and destroying? I don't know what else can they destroy in Gaza, but it seems that the final goal would be just removing people from Gaza. What is that? In how can, with all this show going on in, in Israel, in Egypt, so what if Netanyahu decides the day after getting all these prisoners attack Gaza again?
Well, already they killed 5 people today. So why should we have any confidence that they will not stop the killing? Ever since the ceasefire in Lebanon, the Israeli regime requested the ceasefire in Lebanon. And when it was signed with Western guarantors, the Israeli regime then moved into Lebanon and started occupying areas. They were unable to occupy these territories that they now hold during the war. Only after the ceasefire did the Europeans and the Americans allow them to move in. And of course, the complicit government that has been imposed on the Lebanese people by the United States and the Saudis, they were part of this too. But since then, the Israeli regime has been murdering Lebanese civilians on a almost daily basis. Just a couple of weeks ago, they murdered a Lebanese American family. They murdered 3 kids born in the United States, American citizens, along with their father, a Lebanese American. They murdered them in the South. Did the U.S. Embassy do anything about it? Did the Western media? Was anyone in the United States outraged? Of course not. So they've been killing Lebanese citizens almost on a daily basis. Over the last week, they've murdered a number of Lebanese. Are the guarantors going to do anything about it? Are the Europeans? No, of course not. They are part of this. They are a part of this genocide. They are a part of the aggression on Lebanon. So there's no reason to believe or to be confident that the ceasefire in Gaza will hold. And even if it does, okay, what does that mean for Gaza? Will they allow people to rebuild? The Israelis are still holding 50% of over 50% of the territory. Will they allow people to rebuild their lives? Will they allow food and equipment to come in? They're bombing machinery in Lebanon to prevent people from rebuilding their homes because they want to ethnically cleanse southern Lebanon. That's their plan. That's their objective. So are they going to let Gaza be normal? I have no doubt that they won't. And Trump will try to disarm the resistance, and both in Lebanon and in Gaza. And of course, his agents in Lebanon and across the region, they'll try to help him get that done. We know, what happened, and that the Erdogan is collaborating. We know that the Saudis, they've been putting pressure on a lot of pressure on the Lebanese government to disarm. Of course, after the bombing of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, they're more concerned than before, and things have changed in Lebanon, at least for the time being. That's a good thing. But in general, the United States is going to put pressure on its regional proxies and allies to allow the Israeli regime to get away with whatever they want. So I'm not optimistic about Gaza, but I think Hamas did the right thing. I think Hamas was very smart. Its allies were very smart. They did the right thing. And I think in the long run, if this genocidal war restarts, it's going to be far worse for the Israeli regime than even before, because the world is simply, they're disgusted. And if this starts again, it'll make people even more outraged because they were hoping that it's over now. And Trump promised that it would be over. So if it is not over, if the Israeli regime restarts the war, then Trump will be humiliated. Again, it will show that he's a nobody, but also the entire world will just be outraged and at a different level than before.
Two signs. One of them is that they're not serious about the state of Palestine. The second is that they're talking about reconstruction in Gaza would be after disarming Hamas. It seems that they're not going to do anything to help Gazans.
No. A bit of food will come in for a while, and then we'll have to see. Then there will be stalemate. Now, how will that stalemate play out? I don't know. We may have genocide restart in days. It may take weeks. It may take months. It may take a year. I don't know. It may take years. I don't know. I have no idea. But they are going to impose misery on the people of Gaza in a way in which they have not experienced before October the 7th. There's no doubt about that. Whether they restart the genocide or not, probably every now and then they'll kill a few Palestinians. The West will ignore it. Western media will look away for the time being. They'll allow some food in, but do you think they're going to allow them to rebuild their homes and their streets and their schools? And I don't think so.
It seems that Netanyahu sent a message to Iran, which was transferred, or somehow Iran got the message from the Russian president that he's not planning to attack Iran. What is that? Do you think anybody in Iran would care about what Netanyahu is talking about?
No one will take that as a reason to be um, to feel safe. That the regime won't carry out an airstrike. In fact, it would it probably would make people more uh, they feel more that shift to the notion that the Israeli regime will attack. But there is something good about this, and that is that, and I think this is a smart move that President Putin made. He he didn't just pass this message on to the Iranians, he said this in public. And so if Netanyahu does carry out an assault on Iran, it will not make the Russians happy because Netanyahu will have in fact lied to the Russian president. So the cost would rise. It would be more costly for the Israeli regime to carry out another blitzkrieg attack. Is that any reason to be optimistic? No. The Iranians, as we speak, they're preparing themselves for war. And from my understanding, Iran is more prepared today than it was when the blitzkrieg was carried out. Iran's capabilities now are, and its position now is better than it was back then. And if the Israeli regime attacks, they'll be hit back harder. Remember, Nima, when the war started, and even before, I and others have always said that the Islamic Republic of Iran has a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the people. These Iran analysts in the West and these Iran experts have always been saying the regime is unpopular, people hate the regime, and they have contributed to the Israeli regime's illusion or fantasy that Iran was about to fall. So they've contributed, they've helped the Israeli regime. They were a reason why the attack on Iran was carried out, even though we knew that no such thing would happen. These people constantly call Iran a regime and how unpopular it is, and they're even those who are good intentioned, they're partially to blame. And equating the unpopularity of a government or an administration because of the economic situation in Iran is not the equivalent of disliking the so-called regime or disliking the state or the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's not one and the same. Otherwise, right now, we should call France a regime because almost everyone hates the French president or the German regime. It is illegitimate and it should collapse. I mean, the regime, not the government, should collapse because almost everyone hates the chancellor. And the same is true in the UK. But that's not how it works. Just like in these countries, in fact, I think it's fair to say that Iran is more stable than these three countries. And the Iranian state is more legitimate in the eyes of the population than these three regimes in the eyes of their own people. But the point is the unpopularity of a government and an administration because of economic woes or whatever does not mean that people are going to go to the streets and overthrow the state and they see it as illegitimate. So many people in Iran are dissatisfied with the government. They're dissatisfied with their economic situation, the majority. But the majority of Iranians consider the by far, consider the Islamic Republic of Iran to be the legitimate state. And these people, when the enemy attacks, it's not just that they rally, it's not that everywhere in the world they rally around the flag. When the Americans attacked Iraq, was Saddam able to resist? Did people rally around the flag? They were defeated in Kuwait, and then later on they were defeated. The regime was defeated in the invasion. No, people didn't rally around the flag. When the Americans invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, did people rally around the Taliban? No, the Taliban was easily defeated and they had to flee. So people did not rally around them. The same is, and the same is true in other. If people do not see the state as legitimate, they will not rally and protect the state. That's not, the history does not show that. But if they do see it as legitimate, then they will stand up and fight, whether it's Vietnam or anywhere else, or when during the attempted invasion of Cuba, or wherever. When people see it, the state as legitimate, they'll stand up for it. We knew that would happen. The West miscalculated, but next time around it will be worse because Iranians see that they're more confident in their capabilities now. The 12-day war showed to the Iranian people that their deterrence does work, and that the Israeli regime had to back down, and Trump had to back down.
Professor Marandi, I watched an interview of Ali Shamkhani. He's a former, defense minister of Iran, and he's so important, one of the main officials, and in my opinion, and he's so close. He's to the leader of Iran. And when you look at, he said something that was, to me, was something new, that Iran has decided during the 12-day war, Iran didn't decide to get all in and destroy Israel and defeat Israel. Iran has decided to punish Israel. That was the goal. What is that code? What does that mean, in your opinion?
Well, he was not just the Minister of Defense. More importantly, he later served as the chair of the Supreme National Security Council for, I think, a decade, until, I think, 3 years ago. So you're right, he is an important figure. And he was one of the people assassinated by the Israeli regime. They targeted at his home. They tried to kill him. Yeah, I think we discussed this probably. Maybe I've discussed this before. I don't know if we discussed this together. But after the war, some people were saying, why didn't Iran continue? Iran didn't continue because the objective of Iran was to defeat the regime, but not to create a bloodbath in the region. For Iran, the objective is for the Israeli regime to gradually implode from within. Whether Iran fires 20 missiles, or let's say, I don't know how many hundreds of missiles Iran fired, if it fired 100 more missiles or 200 more missiles, there would have been more damage. But the Israeli regime would still be there. What Iran wanted to do was to show the weakness of the regime. Also, it wanted to preserve its strength because it did not know how long this war was going to last. During the war, I myself didn't think it would be so short. I thought the Israeli regime was going to continue for a very long time. And so the Iranians didn't know, how far they should go, how hard should they hit, how many missiles they should use, and that sort of thing. But also the objective is death by 1,000 cuts. That is the objective. The objective is to weaken the Israeli regime. In the West, they like to say that Iran and the axis of resistance has been weakened. If you look at the points scored by the two sides, the Israeli regime lost. Whether in Lebanon, when you put it together, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, and Iran, the Israeli regime has lost because it has lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the world. Its economy is in tatters. Its people are, have suffered. But the most important thing is that it's lost its so-called its perceived legitimacy in the eyes of the world. So they're the big losers in all this, not Iran. And the thing that will ultimately defeat the Israeli regime, the thing that will ultimately bring an end to the regime, are the actions of the regime itself. That is, you fire a few extra missiles, people across the world feel very good about it. I understand that. Across the world, people were cheering Iran. We saw that. We saw people make songs about Tel Aviv and so on in China, in the West. Hundreds of millions of people watched and listened to these songs. Yes, true. But at the end of the day, what is going to bring down the regime is the regime's being humiliated in the eyes of the world and being humiliated on the multiple battlefields. Each Palestinian death, each murder is another nail in the coffin of the Israeli regime. Netanyahu history, I'm very confident that history will show that Netanyahu and the current regime in Tel Aviv, that they're the ones who will have initiated the destruction of Israel. But it is not going to be destroyed by a few extra missiles. If they strike Iran again, Iran will hit back harder. Iran is much more prepared now. Iran is much more prepared now. It will hit harder. It will punish them further. It will be more difficult to carry out a blitzkrieg with the success that they had last time around, bombing people's homes, slaughtering families. That'll be more difficult. They're more careful this time around. But of course, war is war. Iran will be hurt. That's what happens in war. I mean, Iran is up against 50, 60 countries. Let's say 50 countries. The entire West is with the Israeli regime. They are with this genocidal monster. And then the regional countries, they're with it. Those people who went to Egypt, almost all of them are with the Israeli regime. Their territory is being used by the Americans to help the Israeli regime, whether it's Erdogan, whether it's Aliyev, whether it's Qatar, whether it's the Emirates, doesn't matter. They're all being, their territory is being used by the Israeli regime. They're all collaborating together in some form or another. You saw the Washington Post article, I'm sure, that during the 2 years of genocide, the Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf were collaborating with the United States and Israel against Iran and against tunnels. Why tunnels? Why tunnels? So, Iran is not fighting the Israeli regime. It's not fighting the Israeli regime in the United States. It's fighting against its allies and its collaborators. Those collaborators, whether they are in a NATO regime, or whether they are in the Persian Gulf, or whether they are to the north or a part of Iraq, they're still collaborators. So the Iranians have to take all of these into account. But ultimately, the most important thing is that big steps have been taken to delegitimize the regime, even though all of these countries who participated in this farce in Egypt, they helped to rehabilitate the regime because they tried to rehabilitate Trump. And that is an unforgivable crime, an unforgivable crime, an unforgivable crime. But in any case, Iran sees this as a long-term game, and it sees that ultimately the death of the regime, the death of apartheid in Palestine, will be through 1,000 cuts, and only then can Christians, Muslims, and Jews live as equals in that land.
You've mentioned during the 12-day war, Iran's strategy was to weaken Israel. As they attack Israel, try to weaken Israel from within, or in the mind of those people who are supporting Israel and who think that Israel is so strong. But after all, do you think Iran would change its strategy if Israel decides to attack Iran again? Are they going to reconsider their strategy? Because the main goal, we know that Iran has decided not to attack any of these Arab states in the region. Iran has decided to go in that direction. Iran has decided to limit the number of missiles going to Israel because of some strategic reasons. But how about that? Are they going to change, or is Iran in the process of changing that strategy if Israel attacks again?
Well, first of all, as long as there's no serious threat to Iran, there's no reason for Iran to stop the flow of oil. But remember, Iran's military capabilities are not focused on the Israeli regime. Striking the Israeli regime and defeating it in the war is a sideshow for the Iranian military. Iran's real military capabilities are focused in the Persian Gulf and in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Indian Ocean or the Sea of Oman. That's where the focus is. Why? Because especially since 9/11, the Iranians have felt that there's a threat coming from the United States, that there's a threat of American attacks. So all these underground missile bases that it's created, most of them have been designed for the Persian Gulf. And I'm sure you've seen these underground bases for submarine drones and all sorts of drones that are designed for the Persian Gulf. If Ansarullah can shut down the Red Sea, there's no doubt that Iran can shut down the Persian Gulf. It doesn't even have to block the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran decides to shut it down, it will be shut down. And it will not be shut down for a week or 2 weeks. They can shut it down permanently. But Iran doesn't want to go there because Iran doesn't want to harm the global economy. Iran is, in fact, the guarantor for the global economy. Iran is protecting the Persian Gulf despite Western aggression, despite the fact that Qatar is complicit in Western aggression. The Emirates is complicit. Bahrain is complicit. These despotic regimes, they're complicit. The bases, American bases in Kuwait and across this region, they're being used against Iran. But Iran still protects the Persian Gulf region and the flow of oil and gas and other goods. But Iran's main capabilities are directed at the Persian Gulf. So after we saw what Iran did to the Israeli regime and forced Netanyahu to beg Trump to bring an end to the war, as Steve Bannon has said, I've seen him say twice, that the real story is that after 7-8 days, Netanyahu became desperate and wanted Trump to end the war, and Trump kept sending messages to Iran, and Iran kept rejecting them, and he gave some concessions, and ultimately, after 12 days, Iran accepted a halt or a cessation in hostility. Right? So if Iran can defeat the Israeli regime with its long-range missiles, then imagine what Iran can do in the Persian Gulf. It can do a lot more. A lot more. And this is something that the Americans know. And these Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, they all know this. And they all know that they are complicit as it stands because they have American bases on their territory, which are being used to help the Israeli regime. The Al Udeid base in Qatar, the base in Bahrain, in all of these are being used to protect the Israeli regime. That's the objective. So I think that it's clear as day that the Iranians don't want the global economy to collapse. But the Israeli regime is hell-bent on pushing the world towards crisis. And the reason is that the Israeli regime is irrational. They don't care about anything. Netanyahu and his allies they don't care about anything but themselves. So there is a threat. And there is a threat that if they attack Iran again, that Trump, under pressure from the regime, would try to get involved. Then all bets are off. So the issue is that, again, going back to death by 1,000 cuts. Iran does not want the region to explode. It did not, because imagine if the Persian Gulf is shut down, not only will the global economy collapse, I mean, even the United States, its economy will collapse, even though it's self-sufficient in oil. But the prices will go through the roof. Businesses will stop. But in the countries in the Persian Gulf, which have they don't have no resources. They're just deserts. with oil and gas. Imagine what will happen to the people there. Iran does not want that. So the smart thing would be for the Americans not to get involved, regardless of what Netanyahu does. But we always have to keep in mind that Iran's real power is directed towards defending itself from the Americans, not from the Israeli regime.
I think one of the main points that again Ali Shamkhani was talking about was how Iranian military power was it's independent of any other, Iran, we know during the Shah and Iran received everything from the United States. And Iran was so much dependent on the United States, the way that you see Arab states in the region. They cannot use the weapons that the United States gave to them. They're not allowed to use them. This is the difference between Iran and other countries in the Middle East.
Well, when the Israeli regime bombed Qatar, those missiles went right over Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have spent trillions of dollars over the decades purchasing American weapons. What were they for then? They don't know how to use them. They don't have control of their weapons. The same is true in Qatar. The Al Uday air bases was nearby. Someone wrote or said that the Americans were focused on Iran, so the radar was directed towards Iran and the missile. That's nonsense. The Americans don't let the Qataris defend themselves. It's for them to decide if they're going to be defended or not. Of course, when they tried to defend themselves, the Americans and the Qatari regime from Iranian missiles, they failed. 6 of the 14 missiles struck their targets, and we later saw the images. But these countries are not independent. They just spend money. Just like the Qataris want to set up an air base in the United States, it's just another way to milk Qatar. Why would anyone build an air base somewhere in some tiny country, a dot on the map called Qatar, open an air base in the United States? It's just a way to spend more billions of dollars in the United States and fill the pockets of American contractors and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, we've learned from a tweet that you retweeted the tankertrackers.com, and it says that they're reporting that for reasons still unknown, most Iranian flagged tankers are now transmitting properly over AIS without spoofing for the first time in 7.5 years. What we know that Iran was under tremendous sanctions from the United States, from the West, that Iran has decided to put flags of other countries on the ships, and but Iran has decided to put Iranian flag on them. What is the message?
They've decided to be open about their shipping, about where their ships go. Basically, they're telling the Americans that they're sending a clear message to the Americans that you'd better not touch our ships. They're saying, look, these are our ships. This is where they are. Every single one of them you can find on the map. The ships that are carrying Iranian oil. Don't touch them. You touch them, we punish you. It's a clear message. They haven't been doing this for 7.5 years, as you say. And now all of a sudden the Iranians have switched today, and all of the ships are now openly sending messages about where they are. It's clear what Iran is saying. Iran is being very confident and saying, don't touch our ships. We're going to carry out our trade openly. And if anyone tries to board our ships, because there's been some talk of the Americans boarding Iranian ships. If they board our ships, then you'll see what we do in response. And remember, this has already happened. In the past, when the Americans would board Iranian ships, the Iranians would retaliate and start boarding ships in the Persian Gulf. So I think it's a sign of confidence on behalf of the Iranians. And it's a clear message to the United States and its allies.
Professor Marandi, we've heard that the NATO Secretary General says that if he considers Russia, the relationship between Russia and China, as Russia being a junior part of that relationship, and China being the master or senior part. Do they really understand the reality of the relationship? Because when it comes to Iran, Russia, and China, and this sort of relationship, this is new to their mind. This is something, I don't know if they're able to understand the reality of the relationship partnership among these countries. Why is that? Is that so difficult for them to understand that these countries, they're, they know how to put their differences aside and work with each other to achieve something substantial? But it seems that the mind of European is all about the masters and the little minions.
It's more about trying to humiliate Russia and to and to uh, and be insulting to the Russian people. Or the fact is that China needs Russia as much as Russia needs China, and for all of us, for everyone across the global South, uh, NATO must not win anywhere. I mean, NATO must not win in the trade war. It must not win on the battlefield in Ukraine, and it must not win in its genocide in Gaza, because this, of course, is a NATO genocide. It is a NATO Holocaust. The Israeli regime is a part of this NATO apparatus, and I think for Erdogan to even be a part of NATO is an insult to the people of Turkey, but uh, for these reasons. But uh, this is not a master-slave relationship, or this is not a subordinate or a hierarchical relationship that exists between Russia and China, just as it's not the case with Russia or Iran and China. The Chinese know that if the Israelis are, if they win and destroy West Asia, that the United States controls West Asia. And that is a threat to China. And the Russians also know that they'll be surrounded by the United States from the south. And if Russia is defeated, that would mean the expansion of NATO. That would mean the presence of NATO in the Caucasus for Iran. So, the United States is an aggressive regime. NATO is a dangerous and evil organization, and the member regimes are not our friends. I mean, the people are our friends. People of Turkey love Palestine, but the regime is not a friend of Palestine. It's not a friend of the global majority. It's a part of NATO. We saw Trump actually say that Erdogan was there always for him. I tweeted that also today. He's always been there for him. I think that's a huge embarrassment to have that dubious honor. So no, it's not China knows that if Russia loses, then Trump wins. So a strong Russia is good for China. A strong China is good for Russia. Strong Iran is good for China and Russia. It's obvious. And the same is true for Iran. And this is true for the whole global South. India recognizes that. Brazil recognizes that because everyone sees how the West behaves. They will not accept them as equals. That is what the whole Holocaust in Gaza is all about. Palestinian people are not important. You saw the collective West, the media, talk about 20 Israeli hostages for 48 hours, for 72 hours. They were talking about day and night. And then what were they? 20 men who served in the army or were serving in the army. But you had thousands of Palestinians, which included women and children, who were being held hostage. But the West didn't care. None of these journalists in the BBC, at CNN, the Washington Post, the Guardian, that was not their focus. Why? Because they're racist. Because they're hierarchical. Nothing. In fact, they are more crude today in their racism than they were over the past century. They've gone back to the era before the white man's burden. This is just crude and brutal imperialism. Just, crush them and move forward. That's what it's now about. There's no more pretenses about human rights and human dignity and, I don't know, women's rights or freedom of speech. The masks have been removed. this is where we are today. So yes, the global South is on its guard. They're careful, and that is why those leaders who went to Egypt yesterday, they uh, they have hurt the global majority. They've assisted empire. They've assisted this dying empire. They've tried to give credibility to Trump for whatever reason, even if it was for selfish reasons for their own regime to get some concession from Trump. It was a grave uh, injustice that was carried out in Egypt.
Professor Marandi, before wrapping up this session, how do you find Hezbollah after a year of, we had the anniversary of the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah? How do you find the position of Hezbollah militarily and politically today?
They're much stronger today than they were after the ceasefire. They have huge popularity. We saw the scouts gather in Beirut at a stadium, 70-some thousand. A record was broken in the world, in this small country. They are resilient. And Hezbollah has been, the truth has been exposed. Those regimes like Qatar and the Erdogan regime and these oil and other oil-rich regimes in the region, who for years were using sectarianism to hurt Hezbollah, as they were supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda at the behest of the Israelis and the United States. They've all been exposed now. They've all been exposed. We saw Jolani in the United States with Petraeus, and how Petraeus, one of the most evil people around, was saying, "I'm one of your biggest fans, and do you sleep well at night?" Everyone who is intellectually honest knows the truth about Syria now. Anyone who is intellectually honest knows that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was not 95% right. He was 100% correct about what was going on in Syria. Those who destroyed Syria, they helped the Israeli regime. They helped the Americans. They helped NATO against the Palestinian people. Those who are intellectually honest, who've opened up their eyes, hopefully they'll make up for it. Those who want to keep their eyes closed, let their eyes remain closed. We don't need them. But Hezbollah today, the world knows who they are. They made huge sacrifices for another people, not even for their own people, for another people, to help the people of Gaza. The resistance in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they were defending themselves and their people. Hezbollah willingly made sacrifices to help protect Gaza, to draw away the Israeli armed forces for a whole year. And remember, Hezbollah does not own Lebanon. Unlike in Gaza, where the resistance controls it, Hezbollah is in the country where the Americans have political parties that are the enemy of the resistance, that are agents of empire, like Sami Jaja, the Lebanese forces, and others. These genocidal monsters who carried out the massacre in Sabra and Shatila and others. So Lebanon is not controlled by Hezbollah. They're constantly being stabbed in the back. It's much more difficult for them to fight in Lebanon than it is for Hamas to fight in Gaza, because Hamas controls that territory. Hezbollah gave huge sacrifices. It is a shining star of humanity. So is Ansarullah. And today it is much stronger because it has learned of what capabilities the Israeli regime has, what its weaknesses are. And the Israeli regime today is much weaker than it was in October 2023. It is much weaker, and Hezbollah is regrouping. Hopefully, the Israeli regime will not make the stupid mistake of attacking Lebanon, but the world will not tolerate this anymore. The world is sick and tired of the Israeli regime. We saw the huge protests in Italy, in Spain, and the world has risen up. That's one reason why Trump put forward this so-called peace plan. Otherwise, why would he put forward this fake peace plan? Why didn't he just let Netanyahu finish the job? Because things were going very bad. on the ground and across the world.
Yeah, not only outside of the United States, we had Steve Bannon talking about if Israel wants to attack Iran, go ahead and do it by yourself. We're not going to be there for you anymore.
Exactly. And you see that after Charlie Kirk was killed, fingers immediately were pointed at the Israeli regime, regardless of who did it. But that's just how deeply despised the regime is now. Even among its most hardcore supporters in the United States, you see that that support is collapsing.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
It's an honor, Nima. Thank you.